It's Saturday morning. There's a guy standing in his kitchen in sweatpants holding a cup of coffee that went cold 11 minutes ago because he's been staring at his phone. His daughter is watching cartoons in the other room. The dishwasher is running, and the headline on his screen says the average American in their mid-40s has a net worth of nearly $1 million. He's 45. He does not have $1 million. What he has is a retirement account he's genuinely afraid to open, a mortgage with 2 decades left on it, and a loan statement sitting unopened on the counter that he keeps not dealing with. And he's doing exactly what millions of Americans are doing this weekend, trying to figure out whether he's the problem or whether the number is. Here's the answer. The number is the problem. Specifically, the word average is doing an enormous amount of dishonest work in that headline, and once you understand why, the whole picture changes. The most recent Federal Reserve data shows the average net worth for households headed by someone between 45 and 54 is just under $976,000, nearly $1 million. And for most people in that age range, that figure lands like an accusation. You're doing the responsible things, you have some savings, maybe a house, and you're nowhere near $1 million, which makes it feel like everyone else is secretly doing something you missed. The truth is, the average is being dragged upward by a small number of people with extraordinary wealth. When you put Jeff Bezos and 9 people with nothing in the same room, the average net worth of that room is technically billions of dollars. Mathematically accurate, completely useless as information about the actual people in the room. The number that actually tells you where the middle of the country stands is the median, and the median net worth for this age group is around $247,000. Not nearly $1 million, not even close. The gap between the average and the median for this age bracket is more than $700,000. And that gap exists entirely because of wealth concentration at the very top, pulling the average upward while telling you nothing about the person standing next to you in line. So the real scoreboard for someone who's 45 right now looks like this. A net worth under $48,000 puts you in the bottom quarter of your age group. Right around 247,000 puts you exactly in the middle. About 680,000 means you're in the top quarter. Around 1.4 million puts you in the top 10%. And 8.7 million or more means you're in the top 1%, at which point you're probably not particularly worried about any of this. But here's where the median number itself starts to mislead people, because the typical 45-year-old is not sitting on $250,000 in liquid savings or investments. Most of that net worth is not money in any form that can actually be used. For the typical household at this age, somewhere between 60 and 70% of total net worth is locked inside the equity of their home. Strip out the home equity from that $247,000 median, and you're left with somewhere around $87,000 for everything else combined. Retirement savings, emergency fund, investments, college savings, all of it. And home equity, while real on paper, is not money in any practical sense. You cannot pay a bill with it. You cannot use it at a grocery store. The only ways to convert it into actual cash involve either selling the house and then buying another one because you still need somewhere to live, refinancing and extending the loan and paying closing costs, or taking out a line of credit against it at a high interest rate, which is essentially paying a bank to let you borrow your own money. When researchers strip home equity out of the net worth of figures entirely, the national median net worth collapses by roughly 70%. The $250,000 number looks solid on paper. It does not feel solid when an unexpected expense shows up and you realize almost none of it is accessible. The retirement picture is where the numbers get genuinely uncomfortable. A widely cited benchmark from Fidelity suggests that by age 50, you should have roughly 6 times your annual salary saved in retirement accounts. For someone earning the median household income of around $116,000, that means having approximately $700,000 in retirement savings by their 50th birthday. The actual median retirement account balance for Americans between 45 and 54 is around $60,000. Not $600,000, $60,000. That is roughly half of 1 time's annual income instead of 6 times, which means the typical person in this age group is not behind the benchmark by a little. They are behind it by an almost incomprehensible margin. And when you expand from just retirement accounts to all retirement savings combined, including IRAs and pensions, the median for this age bracket comes out to around $115,000, still nowhere near the $700,000 target. And roughly 38% of households in their mid-40s to mid-50s have essentially nothing saved for retirement at all. Not a small amount, zero. 3 out of every 8 households at what should be peak earning years have no meaningful retirement savings. Here's a fact that rarely makes it into the headlines about this generation. Between 2019 and 2023, a 5-year stretch that included a pandemic, a historic stock market run, and the biggest housing price surge in modern memory, the 40 to 54 age group was the only bracket in America that lost ground in real terms. Every other age group gained wealth. Adults under 40 saw their real net worth jump by nearly 50%. People over 70 gained 15%. The middle generation, the one that was supposed to be hitting its stride, actually lost about 7% in real purchasing power terms. The reason comes down to timing. If you were 30 in 2012, you had a full decade of low mortgage rates, a rising stock market, and time on your side. If you were 65 in 2012, you already owned the house and the investments. You just had to let them grow. But if you were 35 in 2012, you had just survived the 2008 financial crisis with wages that were still barely recovering, probably still renting, and by the time you had saved enough to actually buy a house, somewhere around 2019 to 2021, prices had already tripled in most markets. The window that created wealth for the generation before closed at exactly the moment this group was ready to walk through it. This makes the debt picture even harder to absorb. This generation carries the highest total debt load of any age group in the country. Average total debt runs around $158,000 per household, about 50% above the national average. Average credit card balances are the highest of any generation, sitting around $9,600. With average credit card interest rates now above 21%, the credit card debt is in many cases growing faster than the retirement account. Average auto loan balances are the highest in the country. Mortgages are the largest. And roughly 1 in 10 people in this age group is still paying off student loans. Sometimes their own from decades ago, and sometimes parent loans taken out to help their children through college. Those parent loans currently carry interest rates around 9%, plus origination fees, cannot be refinanced, and qualify for almost none of the forgiveness programs that apply to other federal loans. They sit there compounding, borrowed by parents trying to give their kids the same head start their own parents gave them, without realizing the terms of the arrangement had changed completely. Then there is what has been called the sandwich generation problem, and it affects this age group more than any other. More than half of Americans in their 40s are simultaneously supporting an aging parent and either raising a child or financially helping an adult child. About 1 in 5 is doing all 3 at once: managing care for a parent, raising a minor, and providing financial support to an adult child who is not yet fully independent. The math of that situation is genuinely impossible to optimize. The average out-of-pocket cost of caring for an aging parent runs over $7,000 a year and climbs above $10,000 when the caregiver has to reduce their own work hours to manage it. The average amount American parents provide to adult children monthly is around $1,400, which adds up to nearly $17,000 a year. The cost of raising a child to 18 has crossed $320,000. Childcare alone consumes roughly 22% of a typical family income for those who need it. When you add all of those obligations together and run them against a single household income, the idea of maxing out retirement contributions while writing checks to memory care and covering expenses for an adult child becomes structurally impossible, not because of poor decisions, but because the math simply does not work. The $60,000 retirement balance does not reflect a failure of discipline. It reflects a person paying for 3 generations of obligations out of 1 paycheck. This is also why the idea that an inheritance will eventually fix the shortfall is worth examining honestly. The concept of a massive generational wealth transfer from boomers to their children gets talked about a great deal, with estimates suggesting tens of trillions of dollars will change hands over the next few decades. But the distribution of that transfer is highly concentrated. About 68% of the total comes from households with more than $1 million in assets, which is only 7% of all households. For the median American, the median inheritance from parents in the bottom half of the wealth distribution is around $9,700, not $97,000, not close to that. So $9,700 is a used car with a mechanical issue. It is not a retirement plan. None of this is presented to make the situation feel hopeless, because it isn't. Today's 45-year-old is actually slightly wealthier in inflation-adjusted terms than boomers were at the same age. The financial benchmarks people are being measured against were written for economic conditions that no longer exist, and being behind a benchmark designed for a different era does not mean the situation is unrecoverable. What it means is that the strategies that worked for previous generations at this age are not the strategies that work now. And treating the two as equivalent is part of what keeps people paralyzed. The most useful thing anyone in this situation can do is start from the real numbers, not the average that Bezos inflates, and not the benchmark written in 1995, but their actual net worth, their actual retirement balance, their actual monthly obligations, and a realistic projection of what the next 20 years looks like if nothing changes versus what it looks like if a few specific things do. The gap between those two projections is almost always larger than people expect in both directions. The cost of continuing on the current path is usually more alarming than people let themselves see, and the impact of even modest changes applied consistently is almost always more meaningful than it feels like it should be from where they're standing right now.